Long before the sun rose over Thebes, before even the birds stirred in the reeds by the river, Neferhotep opened his eyes to the hush of sacred stillness. The stone chamber where he slept was small, yet not cold. The thick walls held the warmth from the day before, and the faint scent of myrrh from the oil lamp still lingered like a soft memory in the air. He lay motionless for a moment on his woven reed mat, letting his breath settle into the rhythm of the early hours, slow, steady, as if in communion with the world beyond. There was a peace in these hours before dawn, a deep and delicate balance that hung in the air like the thinnest silk. Even time, in these moments, seemed to breathe slower. He rose with purpose but without hurry, folding his linen shawl neatly and placing it beside the stone basin. The water, still and cool, reflected the flicker of the single lamp. With cupped hands, Neferhotep began the ritual of purification. 3 splashes to the face, 3 to the hands, and 3 more for the heart. Not merely washing, but awakening the soul. As the water ran over his skin, he whispered a silent prayer to Mahat, the goddess of truth, balance, and divine order. He dressed in clean linen, soft and white, as he did every morning. The fabric rustled quietly against his skin. He tied it with practiced hands, the motions ingrained in him like the slow repetition of sacred verses. His feet, bare against the smooth floor, moved with reverence as he walked to the low wooden stool by the door. There, on a small ledge, sat a bundle of papyrus scrolls, neatly tied, and beside them a small bowl of dried dates and honeyed bread. He would not eat yet. First came the path through silence. He stepped outside. The sky was still cloaked in deep blue, with only a hint of gold pressing against the horizon. Above him, stars shimmered, scattered like grains across a vast eternal field. The air was dry and cool, and the temple grounds were silent, except for the whisper of palm fronds swaying gently in the early breeze. Neferhotep paused at the threshold of the courtyard, inhaling deeply, eyes closed. The scent of stone dust, faint blossoms, and distant river water filled his lungs. Every breath was a prayer, every moment a return. His sandals brushed gently against the flagstones as he made his way through the open-air corridor, where towering columns rose like tree trunks into the dim morning. Their painted reliefs told stories of gods and kings, of battles and blessings. But Neferhotep passed them not as a scholar might, dissecting their meaning, but as a friend walking among old companions. A temple cat, slender and golden-eyed, watched him from a ledge. It blinked slowly, unafraid, as he passed. "May Bastet keep you warm," he murmured softly, and the cat flicked its tail once, then settled its head back against its paws. The sanctuary lay ahead, still cloaked in shadow, sacred, untouched by the sun's gaze. He would not enter it yet. First, he would gather the offerings, laid aside by the temple attendants the night before, baskets of barley bread, small jugs of beer, a dish of dates, lotus blossoms freshly plucked, and the pale incense cones that would release the breath of the divine into the air. Each item was touched lightly, blessed silently. As he knelt, placing the first items on a low alabaster tray, he thought of his father, a simple fisherman, and how he would speak of balance in the net, of patience in casting the line. "The gods love a quiet soul," his father once said. "The Nile flows smoothest when no oars disturb it. Neferhotep smiled at the memory. His hands, though aged, were steady as he worked, moving with slow grace. The sun was still hidden, but the eastern sky was turning pale, like papyrus held against a flame. Soon, light would reach the sacred statue of Amun, and with it, the voice of the day would begin. But for now, stillness. And in that stillness, Neferhotep found the quiet rhythm of the world, not in thunder nor proclamation, but in the soft clatter of offerings being arranged, in the scent of flowers laid in silence, and in the knowledge that once again, balance had begun to bloom with the morning. He stood in the great hall, waiting. The world outside still slept, but within these stone walls, the breath of Egypt stirred. The air within the temple grew warmer as the sky outside lightened by degrees, each moment a soft unfolding of gold and pale rose. Neferhotep stepped barefoot into the great hall, the soles of his feet cool against the stone, a familiar, grounding sensation. The towering columns loomed above him, each carved with the sacred symbols of the gods. Ankhs for life was scepters for power, feathers for Ma'at. He moved silently. His presence, like the soft rustling of leaves, stirred the dust, but did not disturb the peace. The sanctuary door stood ahead, tall and bronze-hinged, carved with the face of Amun-Ra in profile, his plumed headdress reaching toward the heavens. No sunlight yet touched it. Neferhotep placed the tray of offerings on the low stone bench to the right of the door, and stood in contemplation, hands resting gently at his sides. To enter the sanctuary, the most sacred space in the temple, was a privilege only granted to the pure, and even then, with humility. Before he would draw back the linen veil and open the door to Amun's hidden chamber, he whispered the names of the gods of protection, Isis, Horus, Thoth, each name a breath on the wind. With every syllable, his heart slowed further, attuning itself to the sacred rhythm that guided his life. He pushed open the door. Inside, the air was cool and thick with the memory of incense and oil. Darkness clung to the corners, and the statue of Amun sat in regal silence, his face half lit by a single, flickering lamp. Crafted from gilded wood and polished stone, the figure was not merely a representation. It was, in this sacred hour, a living conduit of the divine. Neferhotep did not look into the statue's eyes. Instead, he bowed deeply, then moved to the stone basin at the side of the chamber. There, he dipped a cloth into scented water, and beginning with the feet, began the ritual cleansing of the god. Every movement was precise, slow, and deliberate. He wiped away yesterday's dust, anointing each part of the statue with oils of cedar, myrrh, and lotus. He whispered soft praises as he worked, not to be heard by others, but to be carried, perhaps, on some quiet breeze to the unseen world. After the cleansing, he offered the bread, beer, and fruit on a reed mat before the statue. He lit a cone of incense and watched as the smoke rose in a spiral, drifting lazily through the beams of golden light, now beginning to creep into the sanctuary. The scent was rich, sweet, earthy, and ancient. It was a scent that had not changed for 1,000 years. He stood beside the offering mat and began to chant. His voice, low and measured, filled the chamber with steady warmth. The words were old, older than kings, passed down from mouth to mouth, scroll to scroll, heart to heart. They asked not for wealth or conquest, but for balance, for the rising of the sun, for the calm of the flood, for the safe passage of the dead, and the peace of the living. Outside, the first shaft of sunlight pierced the temple courtyard, striking the base of the pylon and crawling slowly along the smooth stone path. Morning had arrived, and with it the gentle hum of life beyond the temple walls. Neferhotep finished the chant and stood in silence once more. He did not rush to leave the sanctuary. Time did not hold him captive here. The moment was whole, as it always was, and the space around him felt thick with the quiet presence of those who had walked this same path long before him. He turned and stepped out, closing the door softly behind him. The young acolyte, Beck, waited near the base of the column outside the inner court, a bundle of scrolls in his arms and an eager light in his eyes. Neferhotep nodded in greeting, his expression kind, and took one of the scrolls. "Come," he said gently, "let us walk." The two made their way along the eastern corridor of the temple, where sunlight now poured in through tall windows, casting beams onto the columns like warm spears of the gods themselves. Dust danced within those beams, turning the air golden. As they walked, Neferhotep spoke not of gods or rituals, but of quiet things, how the lotus opens only when it feels the sun's breath, how the ibises follow the river's moods, how bread rises best when kneaded slowly, as if with prayer. Beck listened with a kind of reverence, not for the words alone, but for the man who carried them. In the outer court, the other priests began to stir. Some swept the stone floors with palm brooms, others tended to small altars or prepared additional offerings. The sound of soft sandals, murmured greetings, and trickling water wove together into a gentle tapestry of temple life. Neferhotep placed the scroll upon a low table, rolled it open, and scanned the list of temple storehouses, inventories of grain, oil, linens, and incense. The scribes had recorded well. The temple's needs were met. There was balance. He looked up, eyes half-lidded against the morning sun, and watched a flock of birds fly across the sky, their wings catching the light. In that moment, he felt not joy, nor sorrow, nor even purpose, but something deeper, a resting of the soul, a quiet belonging, a knowing that life, like the Nile, flowed endlessly and always returned. And so, the morning passed, not in haste or ambition, but in stillness, in ritual, and in rhythm. As the sun rose higher and the columns of the temple glowed warmly with golden light, Neferhotep stepped beyond the inner sanctum and passed into the open courtyard. The quiet rituals of the early morning had given way to the gentle hum of the living city, and Thebes itself, like a great breathing body, began to stir and awaken fully. He paused near a small fountain that bubbled softly in the center of the courtyard, its water flowing over smooth stone, catching flecks of sunlight as they fell through the waving fronds of a palm tree. The water's music, delicate and uninterrupted, mirrored the ease in his chest, a breath carried on the wind. Turning to Beck, he said softly, "The scrolls are in order. Tell the scribes they've done well. Let them know their lines carry not just ink, but balance." Beck nodded reverently, and with a quiet bow, turned to return to the scribal hall. Neferhotep stood for a while, allowing his eyes to rest on the horizon, where the tips of mud-brick homes caught the light like golden clay. Beyond them, the Nile shimmered, its wide ribbon of silver winding softly toward the distant delta. With slow steps, Neferhotep exited the temple gates and walked along the sacred path that led through the heart of Thebes. Here, the city revealed its quiet beauty: narrow streets lined with whitewashed homes, courtyards shaded by sycamore trees, pots of basil and coriander spilling green over low stone walls. The breeze carried hints of honeyed dates, crushed herbs, and the distant smoke of hearths being kindled. Children played near the well, their laughter soft and melodic. Women swept the doorways of their homes, their linen dresses fluttering like wings as they moved. A potter sat beneath a straw awning, shaping clay with slow, circular motions, humming to himself in a tune that matched the rhythm of his hands. Neferhotep stopped to watch. The potter glanced up and smiled, his hands still busy. "Peace to you, Holy One," he said. "And to you, maker of form," Neferhotep replied. "Your hands know the wisdom of the wheel." The potter chuckled. "They know enough to keep the clay from collapsing. Most days." Neferhotep walked on, passing under the shade of fig trees, where traders laid out bundles of linen and baskets of pomegranates. The market was not yet busy. It would swell later with the day's business. But already the merchants greeted one another with nods and greetings, their movements unhurried, their voices kind. Near the edge of the square stood an old scribe beneath a canopy of palm fronds, carefully copying lines from the book of coming forth by day. His papyrus was smooth and white, and the ink from his reed pen flowed like the Nile itself, clean, unbroken, ancient. Neferhotep stepped beside him and watched in silence for a time. "The words are steady today," the scribe said without looking up. "They are," Neferhotep agreed, "as if they have been written before." The scribe looked up and smiled through his grey beard. "Perhaps they always have." They exchanged no further words, only a shared understanding, a mutual respect that required no more than a glance. Neferhotep moved on, weaving gently through the sunlight. In a small shaded corner, near a fig tree whose limbs stretched lazily over a clay bench, he sat down and withdrew a small loaf of honeyed bread and a pouch of dates from his linen satchel. The shade was cool, the stone warm beneath his hands. Around him, the sounds of the city moved like slow river current, not demanding, only flowing. As he ate, he watched a boy draw shapes in the dust with a stick, spirals, stars, and what may have been the feather of Mahat. A mother sat nearby, nursing an infant, humming an old lullaby with words lost to time, yet still familiar in spirit. Neferhotep closed his eyes for a moment, allowing the warmth to wash over him, letting the breeze comb through his thoughts like a gentle hand. He remembered briefly the taste of fish his mother used to cook, seasoned with herbs from the garden and wrapped in lotus leaves. He remembered his father's laughter and the smell of the boat after a good catch. He remembered, too, the quiet hush of the temple's stone hall, the first time he walked its length as a young acolyte, unsure and breathless. So many years had passed since then, and yet nothing had truly changed. The river still flowed, the sun still rose, the people still lived, loved, and died under the gaze of the same eternal sky. With slow ease, he rose from the bench, brushed the crumbs from his robe, and began the walk back toward the temple. But before returning to the gates, he turned toward the river. He approached its banks, where papyrus grew tall, and the water lapped softly against the earth. The Nile shimmered beneath the noonday sun, and far across its width he could see the western desert, home to the Valley of the Kings, where silence held the names of the great and the humble alike. He crouched near the water and dipped his fingers into its flow. Cool, constant, living, it carried everything: silt, memory, life. It had carried him too, from youth to this moment. He whispered a quiet blessing, not for himself, but for all who drank from this river, who trusted it to return each year and bring with it the gift of beginning again. The river did not answer, but it did not need to. Neferhotep stood, closed his eyes, and let the breeze lift the edge of his linen robe. There was still time before the evening rites, time to listen, time to walk slowly, time to simply be. As the sun reached its gentle apex in the wide Egyptian sky, the heat began to settle over the land, not as an intruder, but as an old familiar presence, warm, steady, and sure. The light shimmered across the limestone walls of Thebes, making the very air seem to ripple. Yet Neferhotep did not hurry. His steps were measured, deliberate, and calm. He retraced his path from the riverbank, leaving behind the quiet rustle of papyrus reeds and the whisper of the Nile's song. As he approached the temple's outer wall, he paused beneath a cluster of sycamore trees, where 3 young children played with painted stones, their laughter like wind chimes stirring in the breeze. One of the children, a boy with a dust-streaked tunic and wide, bright eyes, looked up and smiled. "Are you the priest of the sky?" he asked, pointing upward. Neferhotep knelt slowly, smiling gently. "No, young one," he said, his voice soft as drifting ash. "The sky has no priest. It needs none. It is already holy." The boy blinked at this, considering it with great seriousness, before nodding and returning to his game. Neferhotep rose, touched by the simplicity of it all. How children accepted mystery without question. How easily they dwelled in wonder. Back inside the temple walls, shade returned like a balm. The stone corridors were cool once more, and the stillness there was deep and comforting. He passed the pool, where sacred lotuses floated on glassy water. Their petals, half open beneath the sun, swayed ever so slightly on the surface, like dreaming eyes opening just enough to glimpse the world. A gentle voice greeted him near the entry of the scribe's chamber. "Master Neferhotep," Beck said quietly, "the oil stores have been replenished. Shall I carry the lamp for the evening ceremony?" "Not yet," Neferhotep replied, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "There is still daylight to be honored." He made his way into the inner garden, where few others wandered. This space, nestled deep in the temple's heart, was reserved for reflection. Birds chirped lightly in the date palms overhead, and a shallow stream, fed by hidden channels, murmured across polished stones. Here, the hum of insects was more music than nuisance, and the breeze that danced through the reeds brought with it the scent of mint and fig. Neferhotep sat beside the stream on a smooth slab of sandstone, folding his legs beneath him and resting his hands upon his knees. His eyes drifted closed, not in sleep, but in a kind of waking rest. His breath, slow and deep, moved with the wind. In his mind, he began to recite one of the ancient hymns to Ma'at, not aloud, for it was not the hour, but within, as if each syllable rose and fell on the tide of his lungs. she who sets the stars upon the sky, who weighs the hearts of men, who guides the hands of kings, and waters the fields with balance. He sat there, adrift in time, neither longing nor resisting, simply present. After a while, the temple bell chimed faintly, a tone soft as the stirring of reeds in shallow water, marking the time for the preparations of the sunset rites. Neferhotep rose with a quiet sigh and made his way back through the shaded halls, where shadows had begun to stretch long across the floor. The play of light against the columns had shifted. Now warm, amber hues spilled sideways through narrow windows, illuminating flecks of dust like gold suspended in honey. In the preparation chamber, he found the evening offerings already gathered: a bowl of lentils, dried figs, a small amphora of cool water, and a cone of fine incense shaped like a tiny mountain. With slow care, he placed each item upon the ceremonial tray, balancing them so they neither touched nor leaned. Even here, in something as small as the placing of a fig, there was discipline, intention, and peace. Beck arrived with the oil lamp, now filled with fresh resin. "The flame is ready," he whispered. Neferhotep took the lamp, steadying it with both hands. Its light was soft, barely more than a flicker, but it was enough. It would be enough. As he moved through the corridors toward the sanctuary, the quiet deepened, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of presence, of waiting. The temple was not deserted. It was listening. He entered the sanctuary once more, now bathed in a dim golden glow. The statue of Amun stood quietly, as before, yet somehow transformed by the day's light, no longer lit from above, but embraced by shadows, serene and watchful in the dusk. Neferhotep approached with reverence and placed the offerings gently before the feet of the god. The scent of the incense drifted upward, mingling with the cool evening air and the soft fragrance of the oil lamp's flame. He lit it with a slender reed and held it steady until the fire caught, then placed it in its holder beside the offering mat. The chamber shimmered in the light. Shadows swayed on the walls like ancient dancers. He began the evening chant, this one even slower, quieter than the mornings. The words came like footsteps in sand, one after another, each falling gently and vanishing behind him. He did not speak them for those outside, or even for Amun, perhaps. He spoke them for the stillness itself, to honor it, to preserve it. When he finished, he remained still. He breathed and listened. From outside the walls, the sounds of the city softened. The bustle of the market had faded. The river, too, now murmured in deeper tones, reflecting the descending stars. Torches lit the outer paths, casting long shadows of the stone pillars. The temple began to glow from within, as if holding light in its breath. Neferhotep turned, passed through the outer halls, and made his way to his chamber. He lit a small lamp by the door, set aside his robe, and lay upon his mat. The walls around him were familiar, but never dull. They bore the marks of years, of footsteps, prayers, laughter, and silence. He lay with his hands resting gently on his chest, and his eyes open to the shadows, moving softly across the ceiling. The day had passed, not with grand gestures, but with quiet devotion. And so, the evening came to rest, not with an ending, but with a return. The oil lamp flickered softly at the edge of Neferhotep's chamber, casting long, slow-moving shadows across the smooth stone walls. Outside, the last threads of daylight had faded entirely, and Thebes now slumbered beneath the watchful eyes of the stars. It was a sacred hour, one where the veil between the living and the eternal thinned, and the quiet deepened until even thought seemed to whisper. Neferhotep lay on his reed mat, with his head gently propped upon a folded linen wrap. The coolness of the stone beneath him was no discomfort. It was grounding, like resting against the earth's own breath. His breathing, steady and measured, moved in rhythm with the flicker of the lamp. With every exhale, he let go of the weight of the day, allowing his spirit to settle like dust on still water. He gazed upward toward the ceiling, where the dancing glow of the flame painted shifting shapes: a falcon's wings, a reed boat, the curved horns of a ram. His eyes half-lidded, he watched them without judgment or focus, letting them pass as gently as the breeze beyond his window. In the quiet, his thoughts turned inward. He thought of the boy at the river, asking if he was the priest of the sky. A small smile touched his lips. Children had a way of seeing the world that even the wisest priest could forget, clear, unclouded, full of awe. To them, every shadow was a story, every ripple in the water a secret waiting to be heard. There was truth in that simplicity, a kind of sacredness no scroll could teach. His mind drifted further, softly, like a boat loosed from its moorings. He remembered his own childhood, the clay bank of the river in summer, when dragonflies skimmed the water and the Nile was low. His father, with sun-browned skin and hands strong from rowing, had taught him to cast a net, to listen for the whisper of fish beneath the surface. And his mother, seated in the garden beside their home, weaving palm fronds into baskets, while singing lullabies that spoke of Nut, the sky goddess, cradling the sun each night. Her voice, gentle as rain on dry earth, had always lulled him to sleep before the stars even fully emerged. Now, as a grown man, older, slower, he found himself drawn back to those simple moments, not because they were grand, but because they were whole, complete, balanced. He turned slightly on the mat, the linen rustling softly beneath him, and closed his eyes. The sounds of the temple at night were few: a distant hoot of an owl, the shifting of wind through reeds, the occasional soft creak of timber cooling from the day's heat. But to Neferhotep, these were not empty sounds. They were the breath of a world at rest, the voice of the gods in their gentlest form. He let his mind wander, deeper now, into the world of dreams. Not abrupt visions, but slow unfolding stories, smooth as polished stone. In this dream space, he walked once more through the temple, but not as it was today. It was older, brighter, filled with voices he had not heard in decades. He passed his own teacher, wise and kind, who once said to him, "To serve is not to bow, but to listen." He heard the chants of priests long gone, echoing down golden halls. He saw lotus flowers opening in slow motion, each petal a note of music, each scent a memory. The great columns stretched endlessly upward, not just to the ceiling, but beyond, into the very sky itself. In the dream, he walked beside the Nile again, barefoot in the mud, the cool silt squeezing gently between his toes. The stars above were impossibly bright, clustered into constellations, shaped like the sacred bark of Ra, gliding through the duat. the night world of the gods. He saw himself not as a man of flesh, but as a point of light, drifting, floating gently through the endless hush of eternity. There was no fear, no weight, only softness, only peace. Neferhotep, a voice whispered, not one of command, but of welcome, of memory. It was his mother's voice, or perhaps that of the goddess Ma'at herself, shaped like his mother's breath, gentle and true. It spoke not to his ears, but to his heart. And as the lamp's flame grew lower, shrinking slowly into a soft golden dot, Neferhotep lay perfectly still, his breath nearly indistinguishable from the night wind. The temple breathed with him. The stones held his warmth. The gods, unseen and silent, watched with the calm patience of the stars. The man who served Amun, who fed the divine with hands of grace, now rested, not just his body, but his soul, in the embrace of sacred sleep. And in the great hush of the temple, only the softest sounds remained. The flicker of a fading flame, the murmur of the wind, the peace of a life lived in balance. The night deepened like ink, spilling across a scroll, and in Neferhotep's stillness, his mind drifted beyond the chamber walls, beyond stone, beyond time. He had not so much fallen asleep as he had been gently led, as if the gods themselves had reached down and taken his hand to guide him through a landscape woven not of sand or earth, but of memory and eternity. In this dream, he stood once more at the edge of the Nile, yet it was not the Nile he knew. Its waters shimmered with soft light, glowing with a pale silver hue that pulsed like breath. Papyrus reeds bowed, as if in reverence, and the air carried a fragrance unlike any he had known in waking, the scent of eternal morning, soft and ancient. He was barefoot again, robed in linen so fine it barely touched his skin. The sky above was a tapestry of stars, and among them moved shapes, barks gliding silently, the eyes of gods blinking gently, the great scarab Khepri slowly rolling the disk of the sun across the horizon of forever. A gentle figure emerged from the mist, tall, regal, with the head of an ibis and eyes like deep wells of thought. Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, approached, carrying in one hand a scroll that never ended, and in the other a reed pen that glowed with starlight. "You remember," Thoth said softly. Neferhotep nodded. He did not speak, but he remembered. He remembered the ancient hymns, not written in any book, the prayers sung by the stars themselves before time had a name. Thoth extended his hand and led him down a path that did not exist and yet had always been there. The sand beneath Neferhotep's feet glowed faintly, and each step brought forth memories, not only his own, but the echoing footprints of all those who had walked the priest's path before him. They passed through golden doorways, carved with flowing water and flaming torches. They passed fields where wheat grew taller than men, and where no hand needed to sow or reap. Here, Neferhotep saw the field of reeds, the blessed land of eternity promised to the worthy. A gentle breeze rippled through the tall green stalks. In the distance, he could see figures, people he had once known. His teacher, who had passed many seasons ago, now laughed with a child by the edge of a canal. A woman knelt in prayer beneath a sycamore tree. His father stood on a small fishing boat, smiling as he cast a net into waters that mirrored the sky. But Neferhotep did not run to them. He watched in stillness, tears forming not from sorrow, but from awe, for in this place there was no death, no longing, no separation, only wholeness, only peace. A heron flew overhead, its wings casting a shadow shaped like an ankh upon the land. "This is the place that remembers," Thoth said beside him, "where nothing is lost, only returned." Neferhotep lowered his head in reverence. Then the god led him to a quiet garden beneath a great tree, its trunk wider than a house, and its leaves shimmering with golden light. There, seated on a smooth stone, was Ma'at. She was as he had always imagined, tall, composed, her hair braided with feathers, her gaze both infinite and kind. In her presence, the wind ceased, the stars hushed, and even his thoughts grew still. "You have lived with balance," she said. "You have not chased greatness, but served the small, the sacred, the quiet." "I have tried," Neferhotep whispered. "You have succeeded." And with those words, she extended her hand and placed a single feather upon his chest, light but warm, as if carrying the weight of a promise. The world around him glowed brighter, and as he closed his eyes within the dream, he felt not the sharpness of awakening, but the softness of descent, as if falling not into sleep, but into truth. He was the Nile, flowing. He was the flame, flickering. He was the hush before the chant, the stillness after the prayer. He was not apart from the sacred world. He was the sacred world. Back in his stone chamber, beneath the stars of Thebes, the oil lamp's flame dimmed to its final breath and went out. But Neferhotep remained at peace. His body rested in quiet slumber, untouched and untroubled, while his spirit walked softly through the land of dreams, where gods whispered in winds, where reeds grew toward the sky, and where time finally no longer mattered. Only stillness, only breath, only eternity.